Hi, and a very warm welcome to you. It's Dean from maverickstar Observatory. Guys, apologies first of all for the delay. I did say I was going to get part 2 of this video out there for you yesterday. I know some of you have been waiting patiently for it, but it's one of those things. Once the video is put out there, there's no taking it back from that point on. So I just thought I'd spend yesterday going over some of the mathematics to make sure that I present a reasonable and humble argument. And what we're doing this for really is because we can talk about all the events that are occurring in our world, with regards to climate, CO2, the magnetic pole reversal. But I think sometimes we need to take a little bit of a break out of it, and it's just nice, I suppose, to have a different topic to discuss, as opposed to switching on our mainstream media or listening to the radio, regurgitate all those stories that we're hearing right now, what is going on in the Ukraine. I'm sure the bottom line is that you and I realise that we're in a very precautious time at the moment, and we could be possibly, even weeks away from World War III. We just don't know. Let's hope that, things get resolved peacefully, and with the grace of God, the Ukrainians do see the light at the end of this tunnel. Let's hope it's not too far away from them. So let's begin. Before we do though, big thank you to the people that have been supporting our observatory over this time. Again, without those people, we would never have been able to get where we are, and we're in a pretty good spot. Apart from the lack of funding, we're in a good spot. We've got equipment out there in the field, and we're taking readings of that. As you guys know, here at the observatory, we take a reading every 3 seconds, and we process that data at the end of the month on the 17th and relay the latest magnetic North Pole position to you. So yeah, big thanks to you guys who are supporting us. Big thanks to our superstars that are holding the equipment for us. But now let's get into the second half of this video that we put out the other day. So I left with a little bit of a cliffhanger and a teaser. I said something weird had gone on when I had photocopied this image that you're looking at, and what that was is that all the dots that you're looking at was red. All the writing around the edge of this was red, but for some reason when it was scanned it changed the colour from red to blue on the upper dots. And although I'd been using the flower of life pattern with other things and just looking at what more could be found interestingly with the flower of life, one thing I did do was actually fold the flower of life up into a pyramid. And I didn't realise at the time when I scanned this, I just took for granted that these 5 dots on the bottom were the only ones that was left in red, as well as the writing around the bottom. And we was discussing this with my partner the other day as to how this occurred, and we both left it as just okay, it's just one of those strange things. But it just so happens is that if you get this pyramid that you can fold out of the flower of life and lay 2 sides of it down, it covers those red dots perfectly and makes like a very large triangle at the bottom. But if you cut along those lines of those red dots where they start at the bottom to the centre, you can fold that flower of life up into a perfect pyramid. So maybe the forces that be out there that we are unaware of, maybe they was trying to point something out at that point. I really don't know. And I want to mention that we're going to show you the universal equation. I know that a few of you have saw it, but I'm going to use it in a very unique way today. Hopefully it will show you that there's something more to this equation, and we'll discuss that as well. But I'll just say, I'm not that smart of a guy to create such a unique equation, but for most of you, as I've mentioned before, know how I came about that equation. I woke up one morning, I must have been dreaming about that equation, because sometimes you have these dreams where you forget them very quickly when you become conscious after waking up in the morning. And I thought, before I have that happen to me, I'm going to write this equation down, and I did. And then over the weeks I started to realised that there was something more to this. And then when I started looking at the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, pi and phi equations, I started to realise there was a lot more into it, and I'll show you exactly what that is. So we discussed already the Fibonacci sequence appearing in the King James Bible more than once. Not just was it the Fibonacci sequence of the number 144, it was also the 12th order of the first Fibonacci numbers, and it'd been used more than once. And I don't think it was by any significant or should we say coincidence that the Mayan calendar also had the exact same number that the King James Bible was talking about. And I suggested that maybe, you know, the Egyptians were using these numbers as well. And, you know, if so, could that mean, as the Mayans had mentioned 2012 date but not actually said what that was all about, the Christian Bible mentioned something about Armageddon and that, you know, man going through such tribulations at a specific time but doesn't mention the date like the Mayans did? Could we find something out from the pyramids? Well, in this video, over the next few minutes, we're going to look into a few strange but nevertheless facts. Let's get into it. Now, we're looking at a diagram of the pyramid. Now, I'm going to come straight off here and tell you that there is always going to be arguments to do with lots of things with regards to the pyramid. It's my opinion that I believe it's probably over 100,000 years old, and it's very hard to prove anything that's made out of stone, its age of when the stone was cut. You can always date the minerals of which the stone is made of. That's easy, but you can't date when the stone was cut. I know there's been some amazing efforts to record the growing rate of lichen that is building up on the rocks, but you know the problem is with that is if more favourable environment allows the lichen to grow faster, it will, and therefore there is an uncertainty in the dating using that technique. And you know, there is lots and lots of opinions with regards to the pyramids, but I don't think the Egyptians were responsible for building it. I think they inherited it, and of course who wouldn't, because you would look like one of the greatest people in that era of that time if you could tell, you know, foreign people that was passing by that you'd built it, because what a magnificent construction it is. Even to this day still baffles some of the best architects in our world. There's lots of documentaries that you can visit. What we're interested in is finding out whether those sequence of numbers that appear in the Mayan calendars and in the Christian Bibles are visible in this structure. Now, there is always going to be argument to the exact size of the pyramid, but the thing is, we are never going to know. Another thing we're never going to know is how much, if it is over 100,000 years, how much of it has dissolved away through erosion over 100,000 years. We will never know that either, and therefore there is also some other things that we have to take into consideration here. We don't know about the capstone and where it was put, because the top of the pyramid was either never finished or the capstone was removed, like the polished lime casting stones that went all round it. They've been removed, and we don't know how wide the casting stones was at the base of the pyramid, so it's very hard to get some details on it. It is even argued that these pyramids were built using the tools of the cubit measurement. And there's an even argument, would you believe, to what is the exact size of a cubit. And I know that a lot of people suggest that it's 0.52 meters or 52 centimeters, but we will never know whether it was the cubit that was used to make the pyramid, or a meter, or a foot, or it was done in inches, or whatever. We will never know, because the builders of the pyramid never left instructions as to how they exactly built it. And this is another reason why I think the Egyptians never built the pyramid, because simply they talk about every other aspect of their culture in their time, but they never showed us how they built the pyramid on any scripture. And that's why there is so much stigmata attached to the pyramid. Not only is it one of the great structures that we have still standing today, pretty much almost in the condition that it was when it was first erected, but it was a marvellous feat. And you know, if you go to Egyptologists and ask them how it was built, they will say it was built over 20 years, and 20 million, or is it 2 million blocks was carved out and transported 100 miles to the site of where it was built. And for that to be done, they would have had to quarry, cut and transport and lay one block every 2.5 minutes for 20 years in a 12-hour shift. It would be impossible to do. I think you would agree. Anyone that's a bricklayer, even building a wall, knows that to finish the corner of the wall at a 45 degree, you have to cut the brick at the end there and then, you know, lay it perfectly straight. They're called frogs, I think they are, but the pyramid was built out of lots of different size blocks and laid. And the difficulty with using lots of different size blocks is it's not something that you can quickly lay and then get the next one and lay that one to it, especially if you want to achieve, you know, a perfect finish, which is almost what they did do. I will say this, in my opinion, it's not a perfect pyramid. Looking at all the different angles and sizes yesterday, I could have chose a much better angle, which would have been probably 45 degree, which would have represented the square base split into 4 pieces, and the height would have been that set at 45 degree. But they didn't. They chose 50 degree angle, which give slightly less of a sharper finish to the top of the pyramid. So there are going to be arguments any way you look at this, but you know, I think if we can get it almost there, then you know, we can argue, was it the cubit, was it the meter, was it the foot, was it some other form of measurement that they used? If we find significant numbers that stand out alarmingly to us, then I don't think we should be passing that off merely as a coincidence or an error. So, you know, my job yesterday was to find the Fibonacci numbers, or even the golden ratio in the pyramid, and that is exactly what I achieved, and I'll show you how I did it. So what we're looking at in this diagram is the measurements of the height and width in feet, and I converted it into meters, and what I got for the height was 146 meters. And what I did to test my theory was divide it straight away by the golden ratio, which is 1.618. And of course the answer is 90.2. I'll come back to that in a minute. Then I've done the same with the width, because I think if you're going to use a mathematical argument, then you've got to use that argument in every dimension of the pyramid, and that's exactly what I did. The width in meters is 233, and I divided that by the golden ratio, and the golden ratio is 1.618. The answer came out 144.004, and there, straight away in front of our eyes, we see the Fibonacci number 144 in the 12th order, and we have the 9 and 0, which is going to become more apparent later on to you guys a little bit later on when I show you the universal equation. But we have the Fibonacci numbers and we have the golden ratio numbers in just the 2 dimensions of the pyramid. So all I'd done right then was I said, okay, let's divide 144 by 90, and we get 1.6, which is the golden ratio. If we remove the decimal and we just say it's 16, what did I do then? 16 divided by 3 give us 5.3 with the decimal, and if you remove the decimal, we get the angle that they chose to build the pyramid. So we've got the height, the width and the angle all fitting in with those sums that we've just mentioned, which is pretty alarming. You know, some people would say, well, you know, that could be more than, you know, right, Jane. I think it's not just a theory, but, you know, for the Fibonacci numbers to come out in just those 3 dimensions and the angle along with the golden ratio, you know, some people would say, well, if it looks like a duck and it sounds like a duck, it surely must be a duck. Or some people would also say, you know, if you use Occam's razor, that which tends to be simple tends to be correct. You know, it is regardless of all those things. It just seems more than coincidental that in the 3 measurements of the pyramid we find both of those sums that we were looking for. So, as I promised the other day, I said I'd show you the universal equation, and on this chart that we're looking at, we can see the Fibonacci numbers on the top left, on the right the golden ratio, and then below is the universal equation. And what I thought I would do is I'd just randomly use from the 9th order of the Fibonacci numbers to the 12th, those numbers, but use it as one number. So I just compress 34, 55, 89 and 144 all together, and we end up with that number, which would be in the sums of many millions. You could do it with trillions, you could do it with billions if you wanted to spend the time just doing it. It doesn't make no difference, because the universal equation is going to filter those numbers down to one of 2 possible outcomes. As you see already, I've put the 2 examples there, to either a 9 or a 0. And I said in the other video that I did that we find nature using these numbers in its creative ways in which it goes about things. We've also seen Fibonacci spirals in our galaxies. You know, there is no doubt about it. Our universe uses a mathematical way of creating. We see it in nature, of plants and fruit, like the pineapple, like the flowers, like the way the petals arrange themselves. It's nature's way of creating. But the point is, I've just selected some of them Fibonacci numbers there, and I chucked them into the universal equation, and I showed you how you can, from a set of numbers that represent nature, refine it just to 2 numbers, which is the 9 and the 0, as we've done. And you can see how I've done it. I got the numbers on the top, I just simply reversed the order of those numbers, and then I subtracted the smallest number from the largest, which give me the 9639699 in green at the bottom of the 2 sets of the numbers, and then I individually added them up. The answer was 54, and I simply do it again. 5 add 4 gives me the number. I know that I'm always going to get, no matter what numbers I use. I think it's really special that we've got an equation like the universal equation, that it doesn't matter what numbers you chuck in it or what the numbers represent, it's always going to come back as a 9 and a 0. And we've got something very recently in our era of technology which acts very similar to this. It's called binary code. Maybe one day we'll be able to use the universal equation to understand the binary language of our universe, but right now we just don't simply know. But it is well worth mentioning that, you know, we see from a lot of cultures and religion them using by some means, and not, I say this, not by coincidence. It is definitely done on purpose, and you know, it's not quite clear why they did it, but there was obviously a significant meaning behind it. And we set out in these 2 parts of these videos that I've done for you to find out whether there was anything that we could subtract from the building and the being of the Great Pyramid. And I have spent many years looking at those pyramids and found some pretty unusual things, like the winter triangle in the sky by the Orion belt. You know, it is absolute that they built the pyramids on the ground in the pattern of Orion, but they also drew us to our attention to the star constellation, or the Winter Triangle, which is made up of the 3 stars Betelgeuse, Procyon and Sirius. It also is, in my understanding, no coincidence that when you overlay the King and the Queen's chamber, one thing you do notice is that the King and Queen's chamber look like arrows, and they are pointing to 2 specific parts in the centre of our galactic arm. I don't think they did and went to all this trouble for no reason, but do the monuments tell us of a pending catastrophe in the future? Well, there certainly was nothing left in writing for us, and if we have to work it out, then nobody has managed to do it, even me, to this point in time. But what I will say about the Great Pyramid is that it does align with the Earth's rotational axis, and it also shows us the direction of which the sun rises over that plateau. And for that reason, we know that with not just the Great Pyramid but many other monuments around our Earth, we haven't experienced a rotational shift. And we know that because these monuments today still line up on the solstices accurately to this day. Is these numbers just man's creation? Are we giving them more credit for what we should? Is there anything else which is undoubtedly obvious in our universe that we can point to and say that these numbers are merely not by coincidence, and that our universe certainly is using them? We would need to point somewhere off Earth in order to show that, wouldn't we? Have a look at the next picture I'm about to show you. A couple of days ago, we started out looking at an arrangement of numbers on an object. It wasn't this object that I'm showing you, but I did show you this one. I want to ask you something. Can you see a 3-dimensional cube in this picture? Can you also see that the corner has been removed so that you can see what is in the cube? I want to have a look at this next photo. We can argue that man can always find a way of adding numbers to whatever he likes. But what we're looking at here is the hexagonal pattern on Saturn, which was taken by the Cassini spacecraft in 2006 of the North Pole of Saturn. I asked in the last picture whether you could see the 3-dimensional cube, and I wonder how many of you can see what I'm seeing. And the thing is, this is on another planet within our solar system, and I doubt man has anything to do with that. What I've showed you in these 2 videos may not immediately dawn upon you, but I'm sure if you give it a bit of time and ponder it, maybe even discuss it, you'll work it out for yourselves. Guys, I want to thank you for your time over the last couple of days. You know that we have other work going on here at the observatory, but I always from time to time love to share this with others. And if you got something out of the video and you enjoyed it, and maybe you'd want to help support other things that we do at the observatory, there's a link down there in the description. The only other thing I'll say to you guys is have an amazing day. Take care of your loved ones. As always, bye for now.